Now we will go into a panel discussion, but I will make a short intervention about Georgia because I didn't get a chance to earlier. At first, I was very, very disappointed that I was not part of the Eastern European panel, but then I realized that it's probably more fitting that I'm here with the rise of Western fascism, since Stalin, a Georgian, defeated Nazism before. A Georgian like me should be presiding over this Western rise. So I just want to say a few words about Georgia, just so you have like understanding, because it kind of ties into some of the themes that we discussed here, especially Suzanne's memory politics being a central part of rewriting, so the Nazification of Soviet history. In Georgia, you know, we have a prime example of this. We started a podcast called Reimagining Soviet Georgia to counter some of the sort of socially engineered anti-communist, pro-fascist history that's been funded by the West. Things like, there's an organization that's dedicated to make sure that the only thing Georgians ever know about the Soviet past is like 1 year of repressions. Everything else is subsumed under totalitarianism, and even any kind of nuance that you bring in to discuss the Soviet Union, like our podcast, immediately gets called like authoritarian, totalitarian, and so on and so on. And so Georgia, Georgians, like for my example, my grandfather who fought in the Red Army, who was a committed anti-fascist his whole life, and so many Georgians who were part of, actually I just found a book about the partisan movement in Italy, and also one of our, you know, glory that we always talk about is the Reichstag, like the Georgian put the flag over the Reichstag, the Soviet flag. So there's like a lot of, let's say, pride moments that we can discuss in Georgia about our commitment to the anti-fascist, anti-Nazi history. All of that has been completely either erased or forgotten, and now Georgians that fought alongside Nazis and fascists have been rehabilitated with the funding of Germany and France and other countries as well. And so even our former president, who was not, she was born in France because she was part of the elites that escaped Soviet Union in the 1920s. And her uncle was a Nazi. He was promised to rule over Georgia if he committed to the Nazis, and lost badly. And she was sort of handpicked to become president at first because she came from a European, you know, country, France. And she's also the head of those protests that keep going on today about, she was the one who called the elections rigged, and there have been nonstop protests like every single day in Georgia. Of course, they're much less now than they were before. But what's interesting is that when the first protests in general, the opposition uses things like never back to the USSR, calling the new government communists, Russians. For Russians and communists are pretty much the same thing to them as well. But there was even last year during protests, they even burned like Stalin books, and the head of this institution that tries to rewrite the entire memory of Soviet Union is part of the opposition parties. Like, he's on the ticket, like on the party list, and he's also the director of this institute. And recently, with the opposition sort of declining, I saw the US ambassador, the German ambassador, I can't recall the other ones, went on a anti-totalitarian tour with this institute to show where all the repressions happened, and they had all these like very serious looks about the history, and made even like official posts like on the embassy pages about it. And there's this constant war over May 8th and May 9th, because May 9th is a victory day against, over fascism. And they keep wanting to get rid of that and make May 8th Europe Day. And that's like a big debate all the time. And legitimacy to give that May 8th is Europe Day and May 9th shouldn't exist. Despite the fact that, again, a Georgian Soviet Union made Europe Day possible. And so that has also been written. And so constantly in this framework, like for example, 2010 was mentioned, and it's interesting because also Atlas Network works in Georgia. I get their emails. And in 2010, why it's important, like this is just an example of this. In 2010, they passed a law that was a freedom, liberty charter. And on another occasion, they passed the Liberty Act. The Liberty Charter bans all communist symbols and parties, so communism is illegal in Georgia. And on a separate occasion, they passed the Liberty Act, which forbids social spending and progressive taxation. So these two are clearly interconnected. The more they repress communism and the more they rehabilitate fascists and Nazis, the more regressive these sort of policies in the economic sphere also are enacted. So why should people care? Because I used to also be one of them, like, oh, I'm kind of very pragmatic. Like, why should we worry so much about these memory politics or Soviet Union history? Because I don't want to be dealt with all the baggage that I have to answer for. But in reality, it is constantly determining everything that's happening in Georgia. So if we do not have a reckoning with the history of the Soviet Union and stop this rehabilitation and the criminalization of communism that started in the EU spaces with Eastern European elites and Western European conservatives that criminalized communism, that brought all of this funding to these kinds of memory projects, those things are happening, which gives almost no other argument against fascism really exists besides these liberals who think everything is like authoritarianism and this sort of very hand-picked ideas about what fascism or authoritarianism look like. So I just wanted to make that little intervention.